Got some landscape work to do. We're going to be starting on some beds cleanup. Just to forewarn you, this ain't the most exciting video you're going to see. Well, welcome to This Old Relic. I told you it was going to be a video of me pulling weeds. If you like this video, or even if you don't like this video, please subscribe. This isn't exactly every video that I do, but this was a city violation, and I thought that might be just kind of interesting in itself to post up on YouTube. The city violation was for the weeds that were growing in the beds. They got kind of tall. If you can't tell, these are actually some of the shorter ones that I'm pulling out here. These are bull thistles. They're part of the thistle family, the aster family. These are an invasive species. They are originally from Europe and Asia, and they came here around the 20th century, which I believe was the 1800s. So for the last about 200 years or so, we've been fighting these suckers. Some people actually call them suckers too. I never understood those sucker weeds or whatever. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. They're both thistles to me. And the customer had hired me to yank these suckers out. This is, like I said, they had a city violation come in, and they got to get these beds cleaned up and cleaned up quickly. The time of day that I'm doing this is late in the day. Just got done with my mowing on a Friday, and well, I think it's actually like 7 or 8 o'clock at night right now, and I'm out here pulling weeds. It's before dusk, so I think by the time I get home it actually does get dark, and burning that midnight oil in the landscaping industry, I guess you can say. You got those long daylight hours, you use them. Now getting back to the bull thistles. The bull thistles, these suckers are not annuals, and they're not perennials. There's something called, wait for it, biannuals. This was a new one to me. I had never heard of a biannual prior to the information looking this up. For those of you who think I'm so greatly knowledgeable, yeah, after I did this video, I started researching these things because the customer just doesn't want them yanked out, they want them gone. And I had to do some research to try to figure out how the heck do you get rid of these suckers. Well, according to the USDA, or the US Forest Service, which is owned by the USDA, they recommend basically pulling these suckers out and trying to keep on them before they seed, because they're biannual, and if you can get at them a couple years in a row and they don't seed, you don't let them seed, you can actually begin to control them after a few years. Now, what I recommended to the customer for this particular application is that we yank them and then we put down some preen, which is a pre-emergent, it doesn't allow seeds to germinate. So I think that if they're able to keep up with the preen, and we're able to keep up with the pulling over the next few years, these thistles will be under control. They were telling me they have tried everything with these thistles. They have tried Roundup, and these thistles laughed at them. They had another landscaper in to spray the beds with some kind of weed killer. These things, they laughed at them. So hopefully we can get the last laugh on all these thistles. Now, the fun thing is, when I got into the other bed, there must be a neighbor or something with a hive, because these thistles were just covered with honeybees. The honeybees were loving these things. I told them, oh, maybe you can go to the city and be like, it's my pollinator garden. They had a big chuckle at that one. But so we wanted to just kind of get the abatement done to try to get these things down, so that when the city comes back around, they don't get fined later. And so I will get these thistles down, and I will be going through these beds again with a fine-tooth comb, trying to get all the other weeds and everything up. But ultimately, it's trying to get the brunt of the things down and things looking nicer, and the weeds gone, so that they don't have to deal with the city violation. any longer. So that's basically been my goal here. So if you, it looks like there's still quite a few weeds in the beds. Yeah, there is. There is actually a hunk of grass in there that I had left that I checked with the customer, and they said no, it's not ornamental. So I just went ahead and yanked it out. Here we deal with tall grass prairies. We get a lot of ornamental grasses in beds. They are native species. It is just part of the game here. So, but yeah, she said it was just, you know, basically weed grass that came up probably from the lawn when it was tall and seeding or something like that. And so took care of that as well. Yeah, so when dealing with these bull thistles, it's just a matter of trying to stay on top of them. And they came from Eurasia in the 1800s. I can just imagine the guy on the boat. Oh, I have this pretty purple flower with all these pokey things. I'm going to bring it to the New World with me. Yeah, I somehow don't think that that's the way it happened, but that's pretty much... it probably came over on a boat, flew up on shore, and we have been fighting them ever since. And they're an invasive species. And like all invasive species, you can never get rid of them. The native species, we seem to make those go extinct. But the native ones, for whatever reason, we can't get rid of those. Or the invasive ones, we can't get rid of those. But the native ones are really easy to get rid of. But yeah, I mean, when you deal with these things, it's not just in the plant world. I mean, I'm constantly fighting things like Queen Anne's lace, these bull thistles, those are probably two of the more common weeds per se that are, you know, invasive to the area. And but the invasive species is not just plants, it's bugs, it's animals, it's all kinds of stuff. The emerald ash borer beetle, if you've been fortunate enough that they have not hit your area and destroyed your ash trees, if you have ash trees in your area, just wait. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. The way that those are spreading, the only way we're going to get rid of them is to kill off all the ash trees. So if you're in those areas, start keeping an eye on your ash trees, because if they die before you cut them down, well, they get really expensive because they splinter and you can't climb the tree in order to cut them down, and they get big pretty quick. In our area, we had the emerald ash borer beetle in the area, and we had developers creating new development, planting new ash trees with the beetle in the area. And it's like, okay, that didn't seem very bright, but then again, they probably got a honey of a deal on the ash trees. They planted them, they were green when they planted them, they sold the houses, they moved out of the area, they don't have to worry about it anymore. I see that a lot with builders. But I digress. We're here to talk about weeds and invasive species. That's the other thing too, is the Burmese python. It just became a staple of Florida. You're not going to get rid of those suckers. Now, I'm fortunate enough to live in an area where it gets cold enough in the winter, the Burmese python can't survive. So even if people, I mean, I remember there was a big deal because somebody released an alligator in one of the ponds in Chicago. And the good news is that even if they didn't capture the alligator, it would be fine. It can't survive the winter. But other than that, you know, that other than climate, that is about the only thing that can destroy an invasive species, and it usually destroys it before it gets invasive. One of the things we got to keep an eye on right now throughout the U.S. is the hammerhead worm. So it's a worm, and it's got like two little fins coming out of its side of its head, and I know they've been popped up in Ohio. Basically, if you get Miracle-Gro soil, you're going to want to keep an eye out for these suckers, because if we can nab them before they become invasive, then they don't become invasive. And it's just a matter of getting the information out there for people to watch for them before they get invasive, so that you can call your local DNR or whoever it is that handles those things in your state, and they can track down where it came from, and they can basically destroy the products or whatever so that the worms don't spread. But that is the big factor, the big thing that we got to watch for right now are the hammerhead worms. As far as the thistles are concerned, well, I'm still fighting with them, and we will be fighting with them probably for a very, very long time, if not forever, because, well, somebody thought it was a good idea. So what I'm doing here, which is pulling weeds out of beds, this is one of the most lucrative things you can do in the landscaping industry. It requires very little tools, maybe some gloves. You might want a knee pad or knee pads or some kind of knee pad to kneel down on. I forgot mine that day. Otherwise, I would probably be really crawling on the ground, digging through these things. I'm trying to stay off the ground as much as possible. But it gets really hard and taxing on the back after a while. But that's pretty much all you need as far as equipment is concerned to pull weeds. And some good old brute strength. And you charge by the hour. And so one of the first things, I don't know exactly like what the going rate for weed pulling or anything is my advice to you would be figure out your hourly rate and then try to guesstimate how many hours, and that's what you tell the customer that you will charge them. Or and when you figure that out too, when you figure out, okay, it's going to take me 3 hours or whatever to pull all these weeds, add an extra half hour or hour to that time, because it's probably actually going to take you longer. So that's something to keep in mind. I estimated this to be 3 hours for weed pulling. I'm pretty much on target, but when I have to go back and do the cleanup, that's probably going to put me over those 3 hours. So then I just basically quoted them for less than I would have actually charged normally for it. The other thing is too is you can also tell the customer, hey, this is how much I'm expecting it to cost. This is an estimate. It could be more, it could be less. Basically, I'm going to set a time clock, and when I'm working, I will start it. When I'm not working, I will stop it, and you get charged per hour. But this is the rate per hour, and just see basically, and this is how many hours I expect it to be, but it could be longer, it could be shorter, who knows. You could try that too, instead of just giving one flat rate and be like, this is going to be your price. Give them an estimate as opposed to giving them a quote. So a quote is what they're going to pay. An estimate is what you assume they're going to pay. And you have to let them know, yeah, there's going to be variables. Because most people and most customers believe that an estimate actually is a quote. Now, anytime you deal with materials, whether it's an estimate or a quote, you want to label it as an estimate, because if there turns out to be more materials or things like that come up, you want to tell the customer about that as well, but you also need to make sure that you tell them the original was an estimate and have it on the paper. It's an estimate, not a quote, and that there could be other costs involved with pertaining to doing the work. But weed pulling, pretty much, yeah, like I said, you need gloves, you need some knee pads, which I'm not using right there, but I'm on my knees pulling weeds. Yeah. So my knees are not what they used to be back when I was younger. They get sore now. So where was I talking about? Oh yeah, estimates. But like I said, this could be a very lucrative thing. And if you are wondering, like, how do I get into landscaping? And I don't own a mower. I don't own any kind of equipment whatsoever. Guess what? You got two hands. If you can afford a pair of gloves, this is what you do. You can go around the neighborhood. Just literally go around the neighborhood, walk around, find homes that seem to need weeds pulled in their beds. Knock on the door. Be like, hi, I'm so-and-so. You might have some flyers or business cards with you as well. And yeah, I'm doing landscaping. I noticed you needed some, it looks like that your beds need some maintenance and you need some weeds pulled. I can give you a quote for that. Here's my card or whatever. You can give me a call. They may ask you for a quote on the spot, so be ready to know what your hourly rate is and be ready to give them a quote. This is actually fairly lucrative. If you think about it, typically in your landscape business, man hours, anywhere between, at the low end would probably be $65 an hour. At the high end, they might be actually just about 100 or more actually per man hour, depending on what kind of benefits and everything and how large the company is and that kind of thing. So this could be fairly lucrative, and if you can guesstimate properly, this particular bed took me about an hour to clean out. So if you set your man hours at $65 an hour, Now when you do this, you want to think about having to hire people. So you want to think about workers' comp insurance and hourly rates and payroll taxes and all of that go into your hourly rate. So your hourly rate is not going to be $15 an hour, because someday I'm hoping you want to grow and you might, or maybe you want to hire somebody on the side just to pull weeds for you. So you can go mow a bunch of grass, whatever the case may be, or even somebody part-time, but you need to have the hourly rate that will actually pay for that employee, because you know what, you're that employee. And granted, you might be starting off, so you don't need the workers' comp, you don't need to pay the payroll, but then that's just profit in your pocket that you're probably going to need to invest in the company anyway, in certain tools and things like that right out of the gate. So this is just a really great way to get started in the landscape business with actually like $0. Like, you see people talk about, start a landscape business for under $1,000 or for $100 or something like that. I mean, if you don't have any equipment sitting in your garage, you have your two hands, I'm sure you can swing a few $5 or whatever to buy a pair of gloves, and you get started pulling weeds. And as far as finding those target customers, that's just how you do it. You find those target customers. You go walk around the neighborhood, see who needs weeds pulled, knock on their door and be like, hey, I see you need some weeds pulled. I'm in landscaping, hand them a flyer, a card, something like that. That's the other thing too, is when you start, you are going to want to drop, a few bucks to get some cards or whatever, or some flyers printed up, so you have something to hand customers. Again, you can do flyers really cheap. Make them yourself, 10 cents a copy or whatever at the library. You don't need a huge amount of them. Print up 10 of them, cost you $1. Yeah, I think they might be up to 13 cents now, so you might need to spend $1.30 to get 10 of them. But and then literally target customers for whatever service that you're trying to figure out. If you're trying to get mowing, you don't need to flyer up every single house. You can just go to the house that has the really tall grass and go, hey, I'm so and so, I do landscaping and mowing, blah blah blah. Hand them. It might just be a one-time mow thing for you, who knows, but it's money. So, and then you got a little bit more money to print up some more flyers, and maybe you can get enough money to flyer up a whole neighborhood. That wouldn't be too terribly bad, would it? So this will just help. I mean, this is just an awesome way to kind of get started in that business. I am trying to develop this for a while. I used to do this. I was charging way too little money, and it was causing way too many problems for me, that people were like, I'm pulling weeds. I think they thought I was spraying weeds. I never told them I spray weeds. I made it very clear I don't spray weeds. I don't use any chemical applications because I'm not licensed to do so. So I'm going to be pulling the weeds out, and people would complain because the weeds would come back in a week or two, and I'm like, yeah, that's what happens. They're weeds. And so I ended up not only charging bottom basement prices for weed pulling, but then on top of it, having to refund so much of that money because, well, they were complaining because the weeds came back in 2 weeks. So I am trying to step up the landscape game a little bit with the weed pulling and things like that. Because like I said, this is something, it requires absolutely no, well, other than getting to the site location, requires no gas out of machines, no wear and tear in machines, no wear and tear on equipment, except for maybe your own body. But it's really, really easy money. You can charge quite a bit. Like I said, you charge your hourly rate, and there's very little overhead other than the actual labor involved in it. So I just find that I'm trying to step up this game and do more and more clients. I might actually end up looking at trying to do a beds maintenance program. I haven't decided yet. I have to figure out how I want to work that, if I am going to go get the licensing to do sprays, or if I'm going to manually pull weeds, or what. So that's just it. When it comes to the pesticide license, what's holding me back, is what holds a lot of people back, is the cost of the licensing, because you have to pay for the classes. Now, I did buy the workbooks and stuff already because I wanted to look through all of that kind of stuff. So that stuff is in its process. So after I look through all the workbooks and stuff and see if this is something I actually want to tackle, I'm going to probably sign up for the course, which is like I think $150, and then I have to take a couple tests, sit for a couple tests, which I think are another each $100 a piece, and there's 2 of them I'm going to have to do otherwise, because there's 2 types of licensing, and I need to basically get both of them. One of them is your general licensing if you're working for someone else. The other one is a supervisor's license, which the first one if you have that, you have to be working under somebody with a supervisor's license. And then the supervisor's license allows you to buy the chemicals and things like that. And ultimately, as a supervisor, you're being overseen who has the license. So I would need both of those, and I think they're like $300 a piece. So the question is it going to be lucrative enough? And then there's all the equipment involved with dealing with, because in our area everything's sprayed. You don't really do a whole lot of granules. I mean, I have a spreader for grass seed, but everything's sprayed, so you got to buy sprayers. I'm not a young pup anymore. I'm in my 40s. I don't really want to walk around with a backpack sprayer anymore in this stage of my life. So I have to decide if I need to spend like $10,000 for a used ride-on, or how am I going to tackle spraying, pretty much. As you see, we've got everything pulled out of the beds, at least this particular bed, and we're picking up and cleaning up all of these weeds. I will go through with a rake, make sure I get all of the weeds picked up out of the lawn. This particular customer does not get chemical treatments on their lawn, so they don't get their lawn sprayed for weeds. So I want to make sure I'm not dropping extra weeds in the lawn as I'm pulling out all of these thistles. If you get into the lawn and actually start looking at it, you'll find out there's actually a lot of thistles in the lawn right around these beds. So I don't want to create any more. Let's not create bigger problems. So we'll get all of this picked up and put into the truck, and so we can move on to the next one. But you can see that grass cluster right there. I wasn't sure if it was ornamental or if it was weed grass. Like I said, the customer confirmed that was weed grass. It got pulled out afterwards. Well, that was a big pile of weeds right there. Yikes. And you know, this was, like I said, it's time consuming, but it's good money, and that's what what people are paying for, is your time. So charge accordingly. You got to figure out that hourly rate, and your hourly rate should be able to fall through with everything. You know, you get into how much you should mow and things like that. That hourly rate becomes very important, and it's difficult to try to figure out that hourly rate, especially when you're first starting off, because your hourly rate is basically whatever you want it to be. But when you start factoring in all the kinds of insurances and things like that, and if you plan to grow and hire employees, you want to charge an hourly rate that reflects having those employees, because it's a lot more difficult to go to your customers and be like, yeah, you know what, I'm raising your rates now because I hired somebody, and instead of me just making $15 an hour, I now have to pay for workers' comp and everything else. I'm sure they can understand that, but it's a lot easier if you just have those rates raised ahead of time, and you have that money to be able to stash away for whatever, getting equipment that's going to make that employee more efficient or anything like that. You know, before you run and hire employees, one of the things you want to make sure is that you are as efficient as possible, because once you hire that employee, you want that employee to be as efficient as possible. So you want to go as far as you can by yourself until something gives. Either you have to sit there and say, you know what, I'm not going to expand anymore because I don't want to hire anybody new, or I'm not able to expand anymore unless I hire somebody else. And there's the cleaned up beds. Like I said, I will get to the rest of that later, but that's a nice little shot of everything was just covered in thistles. You know, load up the truck and then we'll call it a day. But yeah, you want to be as efficient as possible, so that when you hand that over to an employee, they are as efficient as possible, because especially if you're paid hourly, because you want them to work as much as they can, as fast as they can, and be as efficient as possible, because you want to get the most money out of that employee. I guess one option too, and this is just helping your employee out, making sure that they're the most efficient possible, is if you look at the P4P system. That's something I haven't really investigated too much, but I'm still looking into, and it's something that I'm actually very heavily considering. But this is pretty much the end for this bed and this job. So with that saying, I will see you next time.